Okay, picture this. Someone writes you a check to pay back money they owe you. Standard stuff. But then it bounces. Annoying, right? Now, here's the kicker. What if the original debt itself came from some kind of promise or deal that was, well, technically illegal? Can you still go after them for that bounced check? It's a really fascinating legal tangle, and it's actually playing out right now in the Supreme Court of India.
Yeah, exactly. And our mission today really is to get to the bottom of this. Can you actually sort of cleanse a debt if its origins are problematic? This specific case gives us a pretty sharp insight into what the law really considers a, legally enforceable debt. It cuts through a lot of the complexity.
It really does sound like a paradox, doesn't it? You've got this check, this promise to pay, but the whole reason for the payment is questionable, legally speaking. So the person bringing this case, K.K.D. Pandian, he made an argument that seems, well, almost backwards at first glance. Can you walk us through what he was claiming?
Sure. So Pandian's argument was essentially this. Even if the original deal was flawed, let's say it falls foul of Section 23 of the Indian Contract Act because its purpose was unlawful. He argued that if a check was issued later, maybe as part of a compromise to settle that original dodgy debt, then bouncing that check should still trigger action under Section 138 of the Negotiable Instruments Act.
Section 138, that's a specific law for bounced checks, right?
That's the one, yes. Specifically for dishonored checks.
Okay, so he's basically saying the check itself creates a new enforceable obligation, almost separate from the iffy original agreement.
Pretty much. He's arguing that this later promise to pay, embodied by the check, should stand on its own feet.
That's a bold line to take. Did he have any, legal backup for that? Any cases supporting this idea?
He did, yeah. He brought up a precedent from the Kerala High Court. It was a case called C.V. Rajan versus Illico Ramazan. And in that case, the Kerala High Court basically said, look, the law doesn't actually stop someone from repaying money they got through an illegal promise. The implication being, maybe you couldn't sue successfully for the original illegal amount, but if someone tries to repay it with a check as part of a compromise, and that check bounces, well, that could be different. That might be actionable.
Okay, that is interesting. So the Kerala High Court was kind of separating the act of repayment from the origin of the debt, saying, hey, this person is trying to make good even if the start was murky. But doesn't that feel a bit like legitimizing the original illegal thing through the back door? Does that initial problem just disappear?
That's exactly the core tension here, and it's what the Supreme Court seems to be focusing on. The bench justices Aravind, Kumar, and Joymalya Bagchi, they gave what's called a prima facie view. So it's their initial take, not the final judgment yet. And they found the Kerala High Court principle to be, quote, inapplicable in the context of Section 138.
Inapplicable, okay.
Yes. Their key point was that a debt stemming from an unlawful agreement would not be considered as a legally enforceable debt. That's the critical phrase. They even suggested the Kerala High Court's view may not be in consonance with the statutory provisions. Basically, it might not align with what the law actually says.
Wow. Okay. So the Supreme Court's initial reaction is pretty strong. They're drawing a direct line back to the origin of the debt. What does that mean practically right now? What happens next in the case?
Well, it means the Supreme Court is signaling that you likely can't use the bounce check law, Section 138, to recover money if the underlying debt itself wasn't legally sound from the start. It suggests the taint of that initial illegality sticks to the debt. It prevents it from becoming legally enforceable just because the check was issued later, and they've taken action. They've ordered notice to be sent to the other side, the respondent, specifically to address this limited purpose, this exact question about enforceability. They want to hear arguments on it.
Right. So the final decision isn't made, but the direction seems pretty clear from this initial view. It really forces you to think, doesn't it? Does trying to settle a legally questionable debt with a check somehow wash it clean, or does that original flaw invalidate everything that follows?
Absolutely. And this case throws a spotlight right on that term. Legally enforceable debt. What does it really mean? It has huge implications for how people settle disputes, especially when the starting point was, let's say, not entirely above board. So, a final thought for you to consider. How far back should the law look? When you have a payment instrument like a check, should the courts dig deep into the history of the debt or just focus on the promise made by the check itself? It really makes you think about the foundations of financial agreements.